Our next speaker is William Kerr, and we have a Canadian to come talk to us about the U.S. and the EU and geographical indications. William is a distinguished chair at the University of Saskatchewan. He is a professor of agricultural economics in the Department of Bioresource Policy, Business, and Economics. Please welcome William.
Thank you. As a Canadian, I really appreciate you putting on the heat for us. Come to Washington. Let's see. Okay. One of the reasons that I know something about this is Canada has actually been negotiating a very similar type of agreement with the EU for about the last 3 or 4 years. So we've been involved in all of this already, right? So, but I'm going to here to talk about geographical indications, which has been one of the very contentious issues in the Canada-EU negotiations. Okay, just a little bit of background on geographical indications. They are legally protected as intellectual property. They come under the TRIPS agreement internationally, the agreement on intellectual property, but it's always been a little bit of a fudge. I mean, it's hard to think that champagne, which is supposed to be based on, soil and the climate and water and something, is actually intellectual property. But that's just where it actually gets fitted into where the protection comes from. Now, these products, why do these products need legal protection? Because they are what economists call credence goods. In other words, even after you consume them, you can't actually tell if they are actually what they say they are. So in other words, if you, when you're having your champagne or your white wine at brunch in the morning, you can't actually tell whether it came from Champagne or whether it's California's finest, right? I mean, when you actually consume it, you can't tell. Maybe somebody with a really good palate could, so forth. The same thing when you're having your Greek salad at lunch, you can't tell whether that white cheese actually is feta from Greece or whether it's the U.S. dairy industry's finest, right? So, in other words, people can just pass off. People can pass off alternatives, right? So these goods need legal protection. In terms of the legal protection, we have a divided world. There's about 100+ countries, including the 28 of the EU, who use what are called sui generis systems, which are just specific laws to deal with geographical indicators. And then there's about 50+ countries, including the U.S., that use trademarks. Now, lawyers argue about all of these things, and I'm not a lawyer, so I don't really know. But from an economist's point of view, they both do about the same job. In other words, they, in effect, grant the holder of that right a monopoly over the use of that product name, right? Why this has become a contentious issue, I think, because it was for a long time, it wasn't hugely important, is that part of the European Union's evolution of agricultural policy, faced with cap reform that required reducing of subsidies, they were looking around, I think, for another way to help support farmers. And one alternative is to give a group of farmers, or maybe some other people in the food industry, monopoly rights based on geographical indicators. So in other words, your product, you get the monopoly rights, and hopefully you can exploit those monopoly rights to increase your income. I think also some of it is sort of a feel-good factor for farmers, because some of the geographical indicators probably aren't going to set the world on fire, but your product is deemed special and you feel good about it. And in other words, probably takes the heat off the politicians, because instead of saying, where's my subsidy, or I need an increase in my subsidy, you could say, well, we give you a GI, and they could trot off and go and learn how to make that work, right? It takes the heat off, I think. But anyway, there's been a result of this sort of policy encouragement in the EU, there's been a very, very rapid expansion of granting of GIs. There's about 5,000 now. There's about 300 in the pipeline, apparently virtually all the time. The original basis, of course, was something called terroir, which is this sort of climate and soil and those kind of things mixed together somehow or other so you get champagne. It's special, well, fair enough. But latterly, the EU has been granting GIs to what I would call more human capital things, artisans, sort of things that are embodied in people and people's skills rather than the land or something like that. And at least, you know, from Canada's perspective, as we're a country of immigrants, we probably like to have people bring those skills with them and be able to, you know, make those same products and market them, right? So there's clearly, you know, in terms of international protection, this human capital-based GIs are a little different. In terms of GI geographical indicators in the EU trade policy, and basically, once you've granted farmers a monopoly, how can you increase their returns? Well, one of the ways is to get other countries to recognize those monopolies, recognize those GIs, and therefore basically extend the monopoly to new markets. The EU has really tried hard over the last, all through the Doha process to strengthen GI protection at the WTO, but with very, very little success. However, they've had considerable success pushing very hard for foreign protection of GIs and preferential trade agreements. The EU-South Africa agreement, the EU just finished an agreement with South Korea, which increased the recognition in South Korea of European GIs. And right now, as I said, Canada and the EU are negotiating. And again, it's, the European Union has been pushing very hard for Canada to improve our protection of GIs, or our recognition of foreign or European Union GIs. And of course, it's been included in the TTIP agenda. What might be the European, because I think the push is certainly coming from the European Union wish list for GIs in the TTIP. Well, there's probably, a descending order of importance. Sue touched on this a little bit before. EU GIs, which are considered generic terms in the US, should be protected as EU intellectual property. There's lots and lots of agricultural products, not just wines and spirits, but cheeses and olive oils and meat products that are recognized in the EU as a GI, but are just what are called generic terms. Right? So feta cheese in the United States is just sort of white cheese that goes, you can buy, right? It's not tied to Greece's geographical indicator. The product does not have to be produced in Greece if it's feta cheese, right? So this is where the huge gains could be for the European Union if indeed all the feta cheese labeled as feta cheese had to be produced in Greece, right? So, and the same thing with port and Madeira and feta cheese, Parmesan, all of those things. Secondly, so that's where I think the really big gains are. Secondly, if there's a conflict between a US trademark and an EU GI, they would like to have the trademark canceled. Now, we've had a very, very acrimonious case in Canada over Parma ham, where a Canadian firm has the trademark for Parma ham, and the EU would like the GI recognized. We've had court cases which the trademark holder has won. So I think, if this was the wish list for the GI, they would like, or for the EU on GIs, this is what they would like. Finally, like I said, there are 5,000 roughly GIs in Europe now. Probably they would really like all of those to be recognized by the EU. And finally, because they're continually approving, like I said, I think there's about 300 new ones in the process, they might like automatic recognition of all future EU GIs by the US. But these are clearly in descending order. We need to talk a little bit about what does the recognition of the EU GI mean? The first thing is, if you're an American producer of whatever it is, feta cheese or whatever, that does not mean that you have to cease producing the product. You can continue to produce exactly the same product, but you cannot call it feta cheese. Here's an example. Canada already has a wines and spirits agreement with the EU, just to deal with some alcoholic products. So on the left on the left side, the EU is a genuine EU port product. Look at the bottle, look at the label, right? On the right is a Canadian product that used to be marketed as port. Now you'll notice the bottle, now the new bottle, now looks very similar. It's marked, put on the shelf right next to the port, but it's called pipe. Can't use the name port, right? It's called pipe. Now, at least from what we know is there were a fairly large number of Canadian wineries that produced port in the old days. Some of them have made the switch to pipe with reasonable success, but some have quit producing this kind of product entirely. Right? So, you know, there is value to being port. But again, this could be feta cheese. This could be anything. You could still, you know, market your feta cheese as white or as you know, cheese for Greek salads or Greek salad cheese or something. You just could not call it feta. And the same with the others. And the same with some of the others. So, I guess while the EU wish list is long, realistically they are interested in clawing back generic terms. That's where the big gain could be made for the EU. In other words, if you could get feta cheese and you could get port and you could get Parmesan and you could get Parma ham and so forth clawed back, there would be a large benefit to extending those monopolies for European farmers and other groups. In Canada and the EU, these negotiations, I mean, I'm a trade economist and I've been doing trade agreements for a long time. At least in terms of transparency, the Canada-EU negotiations have been really, really, really opaque. No text leaks, hardly nothing. It's really, really hard to figure out what is going on. What we do know is that the GI thing in the Canada-US agreement has been very, very contentious and has been pretty much left to the end. We still really don't have a list of what GIs might be. GI protection might be extended. The other thing I need to turn around a little bit, I think, the EU also, or the US also has a wine and spirits agreement with the EU, and got some recognition in the EU for bourbon, and I think for Napa, but that was it, where the EU got a whole bunch of products changed. So I think the US also needs to think, well, what have we got that we could push, right, for recognition in the EU? I mean, it needs to be a two-way negotiation, and I never hear very much about what are we thinking about, and the Canadians were the same. The other thing that, one sort of final point is some of the work that I've been doing, is that to extend GI's recognition would, I think, in certain circumstances, lead to direct conflict with already existing NAFTA intellectual property commitments. So in other words, you would be having Canada bring a case against the United States for canceling canceling market access for Canadian products that would now be GIs. Now, we've been looking at it, of course, from the other side, but I do think there could be some things about NAFTA commitments. Thank you.